My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 34 years old, and 3 days before my wedding, my father told me he would rather lose me than disappoint my sister. I was standing in the bridal shop when he called. My dress was pinned at the waist, my shoes were still in their box, and the seamstress was adjusting the lace near my shoulder. Then my father said he would not walk me down the aisle. At first I thought he was sick. He was not. Olivia had asked him not to do it. My younger sister had ended her marriage 7 months earlier, and seeing our father give me away would apparently be too painful for her. My mother agreed. She said I should enter the church alone and stop turning a small family compromise into unnecessary drama. A small compromise. That was what they called it. They did not know I had already seen the email Olivia sent to the wedding venue. They did not know she had contacted my florist, my photographer, and even the church coordinator. They did not know I had spent 12 years working as a compliance auditor, where every missing signature mattered and every quiet inconsistency led somewhere. I said nothing. I removed the pins from my dress, thanked the seamstress, and drove home with my father's words repeating in my head, "You are stronger than she is." That sentence had excused everything in our family. Before I tell you what happened when the church doors opened, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Then tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are now. Because my father believed I would walk down that aisle alone. He was wrong. But even I did not know who would be waiting outside my door the next morning, holding a sealed envelope that proved my sister had planned far more than a ruined wedding entrance. I barely slept that night. Not because my father had refused to walk me down the aisle. That pain was familiar. What kept me awake was something else. The email. I had found it almost by accident. 2 weeks earlier, my florist had called to apologize for the changes. I had no idea what she was talking about. She sounded confused. "I thought your sister already discussed everything with you." My stomach tightened. "What changes?" There was a long silence. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. That sentence never leaves your mind when you work in compliance. People always become nervous when they realize they've revealed something they weren't supposed to. I calmly asked her to forward me every message she had received. She hesitated. Company policy, client privacy, perfectly reasonable. So I simply explained that I was the client whose name appeared on every invoice and every contract. 10 minutes later, the emails arrived. Olivia had written them from her own address. She never pretended to be me. That was almost more disturbing. She simply assumed everyone would listen to her. She instructed the florist to replace my white peonies with blush roses, because, according to her, Margaret will appreciate something less flashy. I had never ordered roses. She asked the photographer to remove several family portraits, because she didn't want Dad feeling uncomfortable. She even requested that my first dance be shortened, because guests get bored. Every message ended the same way. "Please don't bother Margaret with these little details. I'll handle everything." It sounded helpful, almost caring. Anyone reading those emails without context would think she was a devoted younger sister trying to reduce stress before the wedding. I knew better. Olivia had always hidden control behind kindness. When we were children, she volunteered to organize my birthday parties. Then somehow every game became her favorite game. Every cake became her favorite flavor. Every guest ended up celebrating her instead of me. When I was 16, she insisted on helping me choose a prom dress. She convinced me to buy the blue one. The next week, she bought the exact same dress in red and spent the entire evening telling everyone how funny the coincidence was. Nothing was ever openly cruel. Nothing dramatic enough for anyone else to notice. That was her gift. She never stole the spotlight. She slowly rotated it until it pointed toward her. For years, I believed I was imagining it. Whenever I tried to explain it, my mother smiled patiently. "Sweetheart, Olivia just likes being involved." My father always said the same thing. "You're reading too much into it." After hearing those words enough times, you start questioning your own memory. You wonder whether you're too sensitive, whether you're selfish, whether the problem is you. That uncertainty followed me well into adulthood. Ironically, my profession cured it. As a compliance auditor, I investigated irregularities that most people dismissed as harmless mistakes. A missing receipt, an altered timestamp, a signature in the wrong place, tiny details, patterns, evidence. Feelings could be questioned, Records could not. That was why the florist's emails disturbed me so much. Not because Olivia had interfered, because she had done it repeatedly, systematically, confidently. She expected no one to stop her. I opened every message again. Then I noticed something I had completely missed before. Each email copied one additional address, not mine, not my fiancé Ethan's, not my parents'. Someone named R. Hayes Consulting. At first I assumed it belonged to my father, but he had retired from legal practice years ago. Besides, his old business used a completely different domain. I searched my inbox. Nothing. I searched old family documents. Nothing again. Yet every vendor had been instructed to reply to that address. Someone had been monitoring every single wedding decision without my knowledge. I leaned back in my chair. A coincidence. Maybe. But I had built my career on one simple rule. When something appears in every file, it is never there by accident. Then, at exactly 8:15 the following morning, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was an elderly man in a gray delivery uniform. He held a thick sealed envelope. "There isn't a signature required," he said quietly. "Only one instruction." He looked directly at me. "I'm supposed to tell you not to open this until you're completely alone." He handed me the envelope. Then he walked away before I could ask who had sent it. I locked the front door before I touched the envelope. That wasn't fear, it was habit. In my profession, chain of custody mattered. If someone sent documents anonymously, there was always a reason. The envelope had no return address. Only my name, Margaret Hayes, written in careful block letters. Inside were three things: a flash drive, a printed spreadsheet, and a handwritten note. The note contained only one sentence: "You deserve the truth before you say I do." I stared at it for several seconds. No signature, no explanation. I inserted the flash drive into my laptop. It contained one folder: Wedding. Inside were dozens of files: emails, invoices, contracts, phone logs. Every document was dated within the last 6 weeks. Someone had been collecting evidence, systematically, just like I would have. The first file made my chest tighten. It was a recording transcript. The call had taken place between Olivia and my wedding planner. "I'll need you to move Dad's seat." The planner sounded confused. "I thought he's walking Margaret down the aisle." There was a short laugh. "No, that's changing." "What should I tell her?" "You won't. Dad will." I stopped reading. I covered my mouth. My father hadn't made his decision 3 days before the wedding. They had planned it weeks ago, every conversation, every excuse, every reassuring phone call. He had smiled at me during Sunday dinner, knowing he had already agreed to humiliate me. I opened another file, an invoice. It showed that Olivia had requested additional floral arrangements, not for my ceremony, for a private family brunch the morning after the wedding. The guest list stunned me. Richard Hayes, Susan Hayes, Olivia Hayes, several cousins, aunts, uncles, even family friends. My name wasn't there, neither was Ethan's. They were planning a family celebration after my wedding, without inviting the bride. I felt physically sick, still. None of it explained the mysterious email address. R. Hayes Consulting. I searched the folder. Finally, I found it. A PDF titled Vendor Instructions. Every vendor had received the same message. It wasn't from Olivia. It wasn't from my father. It came from that consulting address. The signature at the bottom simply read, Wedding Coordination Office. No individual name, no phone number, just the email. I checked the metadata, created by Rebecca Lawson. I frowned. I didn't know anyone by that name. Then I froze. I did. Rebecca Lawson wasn't a wedding planner. She had been my father's legal assistant for almost 25 years. She retired shortly after he retired. She practically lived in our house when I was growing up. She knew every birthday, every anniversary, every family secret. Why was she coordinating my wedding behind my back? I searched the folder again. Another document appeared. Meeting notes. The file was only 1 page long. At the bottom was a sentence highlighted in yellow. Objective remains unchanged. Ensure Margaret does not suspect the venue transfer until after the ceremony. Venue transfer. I read it again, then again. My heartbeat became so loud I could barely hear myself think. What venue transfer? My ceremony was in a historic stone church. The reception was at the Grand Ashford Ballroom. Both had been fully paid months ago. I immediately logged into my online client portal for the ballroom. The reservation still existed. Same date, same ballroom, same guest count. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed something almost invisible. A revised contract had been uploaded the previous afternoon. I had never received a notification. I downloaded it. The first page looked identical. The second page looked identical. On page 4, one paragraph had changed. The ballroom assigned to my reception was no longer the Grand Ashford Ballroom. It had been moved to the much smaller Garden Hall. Capacity: 80 guests. I had invited 212 people. I stared at the screen. Garden Hall wasn't even in the main building. It was a separate structure on the edge of the property. Half my guests wouldn't fit inside. There had to be some mistake. I grabbed my phone and called the venue. The events manager answered immediately. "Good afternoon, Grand Ashford. This is Margaret Hayes. I need to verify my reservation." There was a pause. "I'll just pull up your file." More silence. Then, "Oh." It wasn't a normal "oh." It was the kind people make when they realize they've discovered a disaster. "Mrs. Hayes." I corrected her automatically. "I'm not Mrs. Hayes yet." She hesitated. I'm so sorry." "For what?" Another long silence. Then she quietly asked the question that changed everything. "Didn't your father explain why he authorized the changes to both weddings?" For a second, I thought I had misheard her. My father authorized changes to both weddings? The line went silent. The events manager sounded just as confused as I felt. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "I assumed you knew." "Knew what?" She hesitated. "As a rule, we don't discuss another client's reservation." Another client. My pulse quickened. "I am your client." "Yes." "Then tell me why you just said both weddings." She inhaled slowly. "I'm only going to tell you what appears in our system." I grabbed a notebook from my desk. "Old habits. Document everything. Your father attended an appointment here 5 weeks ago." My pen froze. "He came with another woman, Olivia. I don't know her name. And he requested several changes to your reception. I know about the ballroom. There were other changes." I waited. "He also placed a temporary hold on our grand ballroom for another wedding celebration scheduled 6 months from now." 6 months. I frowned. "Who is getting married?" "I'm sorry, that information isn't available to me." "Then why would my father be involved?" "I honestly don't know." She sounded sincere, but there was something unusual. "What?" "He specifically instructed us not to mention the second reservation if you contacted us." Every muscle in my body tightened. "Did he explain why?" "He simply said it would create unnecessary family conflict." Family conflict. That phrase again, always neat, always reasonable, always hiding something much uglier. "Could you email me every document that legally belongs to my reservation?" "I can. And the authorization forms? Those as well. What about the signature pages?" Another pause. "I'll include everything." Within 3 minutes, the email arrived. 23 PDF files. I downloaded them all. The authorization form looked legitimate. My father's signature appeared on the final page. Except, it shouldn't have. My father wasn't listed anywhere on my contract. Only Ethan and I had authorization rights. No one else. Not even with written permission. Yet somehow the venue had accepted his instructions. I examined every page. Then I noticed a small attachment labeled Additional Authorization. It contained a scanned power of attorney, issued in my name. My breathing stopped. I had never signed a power of attorney. I zoomed in. The signature looked like mine. Almost. The first letter slanted differently. The final stroke curved upward instead of down. Someone had practiced it. Not perfectly, but well enough that a busy employee probably wouldn't notice. I immediately called Ethan. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, beautiful." His voice nearly broke me. I hadn't told him any of this. I wanted to protect him from unnecessary stress before the wedding. Now I realized that keeping quiet had only isolated me. "Ethan." Something in my voice changed his immediately. "What's wrong? I need you to come home. I'm leaving work now. No questions?" "I'll ask when I get there." 25 minutes later, he walked through the front door carrying coffee for both of us. He didn't speak. He simply sat beside me. I handed him the folder. He read every page. every email, every transcript, every contract. He never interrupted. When he finally reached the forged authorization, he looked at me. "This isn't your signature. No. You didn't sign anything? Never." He slowly closed the folder. Then he asked the one question I hadn't allowed myself to think about. If they're willing to forge paperwork for a wedding. He looked directly into my eyes. "What else have they signed in your name over the years?" The room suddenly felt much colder. I thought about my childhood savings account, college paperwork, insurance forms, tax returns. The trust my grandmother had supposedly left for both granddaughters. Documents, always handled by my father. I had trusted him completely, until now. My phone buzzed. A new email. Sender? Rebecca Lawson, the same Rebecca Lawson whose name appeared in the hidden metadata. The subject line contained only 5 words. "We need to meet today. No greeting, no explanation." The email ended with one sentence. "There are things your father never intended you to discover before Saturday." I stared at Rebecca Lawson's email for almost a full minute. Then I replied with 3 words. "Where are you?" Her answer came less than 30 seconds later. The Riverside Library, not a cafe, not her house, a public library. That told me everything I needed to know. She was afraid someone might be watching. Ethan insisted on coming with me. I almost said no. Then I remembered how many mistakes I had made by trying to protect everyone except myself. We drove in silence. The Riverside Library occupied an old limestone building overlooking the river. Rebecca was already there. She looked older than I remembered. Her silver hair was shorter, her shoulders slightly bent. But her eyes were exactly the same, sharp, observant. The eyes of someone who had spent decades reading legal documents. She stood when she saw me. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't." She nodded. "I wouldn't have." She glanced toward Ethan. "You must be the man who's marrying her." He offered a polite smile. "I hope so." For the first time that day, Rebecca smiled. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. She opened a leather briefcase. "I don't have much time. What is this about?" She carefully placed a thick folder on the table. Not dramatically, almost respectfully. "I worked for your father for 26 years. I know." I typed nearly every contract he ever signed. She slid the folder toward me. I also typed documents I wish I had refused. I slowly opened it. The first page carried my name. Margaret Elaine Hayes. The date was almost 15 years old. Below it was another name. Olivia Hayes, then another. The Hayes Family Educational Trust. My grandmother. I looked at Rebecca. My parents told me Grandma divided everything equally. Rebecca closed her eyes. They weren't completely honest. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother intended everything to be divided equally." "Intended?" "She changed the trust 6 months before she died." I frowned. "I never heard about that." "Because your father made sure you wouldn't." The room became perfectly quiet. Rebecca spoke softly. "Your grandmother believed Olivia wasn't ready to manage money responsibly. That wasn't difficult to believe. Olivia had declared bankruptcy before turning 30. She changed careers every year. She treated credit cards as free money. So Grandma changed the trust." Rebecca nodded. "She placed your inheritance inside an irrevocable trust." I recognized the legal term immediately. Irrevocable. Once created. Almost impossible to alter. The trustee wasn't your father, then who? Rebecca looked directly at me. "You." I stared at her. "What?" "You became sole trustee the day you turned 30. I whispered the next question. "How much?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed me another document. The last valuation. My eyes moved to the final page. I stopped breathing. Just over $4.8 million. I looked back up. This has to be wrong. It isn't. My parents said Grandma left almost nothing. They lied. My father handled probate. He handled many things. I felt Ethan squeeze my hand beneath the table. Rebecca continued. The trust owned investment accounts, commercial property, municipal bonds. It grew quietly for years. I shook my head. If I became trustee 4 years ago, Rebecca finished the sentence for me. You should have received full control. I never did. I know. How? Because every notification was redirected. I felt a chill spread across my arms. Redirected? Where? Rebecca slowly removed another envelope. This is why I contacted you. Inside were certified mailing records. Every annual trust notification had been sent, not to my address, to my father's law office, signed for Richard Hayes, year after year. He had intercepted every notice, every statement, every legal update for 4 years, without telling me. I kept copies, Rebecca whispered. I couldn't destroy them. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I was afraid. Of my father, she nodded. He wasn't a cruel man. She paused. But he became obsessed with protecting Olivia. She lowered her voice. He truly believed everything should eventually belong to her. I felt physically ill. My wedding. Rebecca nodded again. It isn't about the aisle. It never was. Then what is it about? She answered with heartbreaking certainty. Saturday is the last day you remain distracted. What happens after Saturday? You return from your honeymoon. You check your mail. You discover the trust. And Richard knows you'll finally ask questions. I suddenly understood. The wedding wasn't the target. It was the deadline. Rebecca leaned even closer. There is one more document. She hesitated before placing it on the table. I've carried this copy for almost 12 years. I unfolded it. At first, it looked like another trust amendment. Then I saw the title, Petition for Adult Adoption. Applicant, Richard Hayes. Proposed adoptee, Olivia Hayes. I frowned in confusion. They're already father and daughter. Rebecca slowly shook her head. No, Margaret. They aren't. The words hung between us. Then she quietly said the sentence that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Olivia is not your father's biological daughter. The world seemed to stop. I looked at Rebecca, then at Ethan, then back at the document. I'm sorry, I whispered. What did you just say? Rebecca folded her hands. Olivia isn't Richard's biological daughter. I waited for the rest. It didn't come. Instead, she quietly added, but that's not the part that matters. I frowned. Then what does? Richard never cared that she wasn't his biological child. She spoke slowly, choosing every word with care. He loved her from the day Susan brought her home. I felt my shoulders relax slightly. Then Rebecca continued. The problem is what happened afterward. She slid another folder toward me. Richard spent 30 years trying to erase his guilt. I opened it. Hospital records, insurance forms, old newspaper clippings. There was one article from 31 years ago. A winter highway accident. One fatality. A young man named Daniel Brooks, 28 years old. I had never heard that name before. Rebecca tapped the article. Daniel Brooks was Olivia's biological father. I looked at her. And? He was Richard's closest friend. Silence. They were law school roommates. They started their first legal practice together. My heart pounded. The accident happened because Richard insisted Daniel drive through an ice storm to deliver documents to court. I slowly lowered the newspaper. Daniel never came home. Rebecca nodded. Susan was Daniel's younger sister. Everything suddenly connected. Susan, Richard, Daniel, Olivia. My mother was already a widow. Yes. And Olivia was only a few months old. Rebecca looked toward the window before continuing. Richard blamed himself. He paid every bill. He helped Susan. A year later, they married, I whispered. So Olivia grew up believing Richard was her father. Rebecca nodded. He legally adopted her before she started kindergarten. I leaned back. For the first time since opening the envelope that morning, I felt sympathy for my father. His life had begun with tragedy. His love for Olivia had been genuine. But Rebecca wasn't finished. Guilt can be a beautiful thing. She paused. It can also become an addiction. What do you mean? Richard spent 3 decades trying to compensate Olivia for losing her biological father. She looked directly at me. Eventually, he stopped noticing that every gift to Olivia came at your expense. Every sentence landed harder than the last. The dance recital, the first car, the business loan, my college fund. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Yes. The trust. Yes. My wedding. Yes. None of it had been done because Richard loved me less. It had been done because he could never forgive himself. That almost hurt more, because it meant he had seen every sacrifice, every disappointment, every tear, and still convinced himself it was necessary. Ethan finally spoke. "Does Olivia know any of this?" Rebecca shook her head. "No. She believes Richard is her biological father. And Susan? She promised never to tell her." I stared at the family photograph lying inside the folder. We looked happy. Richard held both daughters, one on each side. No one looking at that picture would ever imagine the secrets buried underneath it. Then another thought struck me. If Olivia doesn't know, why was Dad trying to transfer my trust to her? Rebecca became very quiet. "Because 6 months ago, she swallowed. Richard received a diagnosis. I felt my stomach tighten again." "What diagnosis?" "Early Alzheimer's disease." The words echoed through the room. "He hid it from everyone." Rebecca nodded. "He told only me. He was terrified. Terrified that Olivia wouldn't be financially secure after he was gone." I closed my eyes. "So he decided to give her everything," Rebecca answered softly. "I believe he convinced himself he was fixing an old injustice. But in reality, he was creating a new one." For several minutes, none of us spoke. Outside, children laughed near the river. Inside, 30 years of my family's history lay scattered across the table. Then Rebecca reached into the bottom of her briefcase. "There is one last thing. Unlike the other documents, this wasn't a copy. It was an original. Heavy cream-colored paper. Embossed seal." She placed it carefully in front of me. "I was instructed to destroy this after Richard signed it." "You didn't." "No. Why?" "Because something about it felt wrong." I unfolded the document. At the top were 6 words: "Revocation of trustee by incapacity." My blood ran cold. The effective date was tomorrow morning, the morning before my wedding. And attached to the final page was a medical certification declaring that I, Margaret Hayes, was mentally incapable of managing my own financial affairs. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It belonged to a physician I had never met. And beside it was my father's signature, authorizing everything. I couldn't breathe. Not because of the document, because of the signature. My father's signature was unmistakable. He had signed thousands of legal documents during his career, every letter, every stroke, perfectly controlled. I looked at Rebecca. "Is this real?" She answered without hesitation. "The signature is." "The medical opinion?" "I don't know." I read the document again. It claimed I suffered from severe emotional instability, impaired judgment, and an inability to manage complex financial decisions. I almost laughed. For the last 9 years, I had worked as a senior compliance auditor for one of the largest healthcare systems in the state. Every week, I reviewed contracts worth millions of dollars. Yet, according to this paper, I was mentally incapable of managing my own affairs. "This is absurd." "It is," Ethan agreed. Rebecca leaned forward. "I don't think Richard believed it would ever be challenged." "What do you mean?" "He expected you to leave for your honeymoon. The trustees would process the paperwork. By the time you returned, the trust would already be under emergency administration." I continued reading. "Temporary trustee, Richard Hayes, successor beneficiary, Olivia Hayes." My vision blurred. It wasn't about borrowing money. It wasn't about protecting Olivia. It was about permanently transferring almost $5 million, legally, quietly, without ever asking me. I looked at Ethan. "We're not waiting until Saturday." He nodded immediately. "What do you want to do?" I smiled for the first time that day. The kind of smile my coworkers knew well. The one that meant someone had underestimated me. "We audit." Rebecca looked confused. "This isn't a company." "No, but fraud follows the same rules." I pulled my notebook closer. Step 1. I wrote, "Preserve evidence." Every file from Rebecca was copied onto 2 encrypted drives. One stayed with Ethan, one stayed with me. Then I uploaded everything to secure cloud storage. If anyone tried to destroy the originals, it wouldn't matter anymore. Step 2. Freeze the trust. Rebecca looked surprised. "You can do that if fraud is suspected." She slowly nodded. "I know someone." Within 15 minutes, she had arranged a meeting with the independent attorney representing the original trust company. Not my father's old firm, the actual corporate trustee. Exactly the people I needed. Their office occupied the 19th floor of a downtown building. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Ethan and I walked into the conference room, carrying 3 binders. No speeches, no accusations, only documents. The attorney, introducing himself as Michael Turner, looked to be in his early 60s, calm, careful, the type of lawyer who measured every sentence. I've reviewed the email Mrs. Lawson sent. He folded his hands. If these documents are authentic, they are. Surprise. Then we have a very serious situation. I slid the forged medical declaration across the table. He examined it for less than 10 seconds before looking up. When did you first see this? Today. And you've never met this physician? Never. He picked up another file. The forged power of attorney. Then the redirected trust notices. Then the wedding correspondence. He said nothing for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, he removed his glasses. I have represented family trusts for 34 years. His voice remained perfectly calm. I rarely use the word fraud. He gently tapped the folder. I'm comfortable using it today. For the first time since opening Rebecca's envelope, someone else had said it. Fraud. Not misunderstanding, not family conflict. Fraud. What happens now? I asked. He reached for his phone. The trust is frozen immediately. No distributions, no changes, no new trustees. No beneficiary modifications. He looked directly at me. Until a court determines otherwise. Relief washed over me. The money was safe, at least for now. Then Michael asked a question I wasn't expecting. Miss Hayes? Yes? Do you still intend to get married on Saturday? I looked at Ethan. He squeezed my hand. I intend to marry him. Michael smiled. I hoped you'd say that. But not at the Grand Ashford. He shook his head. I wouldn't. Why? Because if your father realizes the trust is frozen. He paused. Saturday may stop being about your wedding. What do you think it becomes? His answer came immediately. A negotiation. Ethan frowned. We're not negotiating. No, Michael agreed. You aren't. He closed the final binder, but Richard Hayes doesn't know that yet. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Margaret? It was my father's voice, for the first time in my life. He sounded frightened. Sweetheart, I need to see you. Right now. Before I could answer, he said the one sentence I never expected to hear. Olivia found the documents. My heart skipped. What documents? The ones she was never supposed to know existed. Then, in the background, I heard shouting, a woman crying. Something crashed onto the floor. And just before the call disconnected, I heard Olivia scream, You lied to me my entire life. For several seconds, no one spoke. My father's call had ended. The conference room was silent. Michael Turner looked at me. What happened? I slowly lowered the phone. Olivia knows. Rebecca closed her eyes. Oh no. What? Richard wanted to tell her after your wedding. Tell her what? The truth about Daniel, the trust, everything. She took a deep breath. He believed one last happy family event would somehow make the conversation easier. I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, he still believed appearances mattered more than honesty. Ethan stood. We're going. Where? Michael asked. My future father-in-law's house. Michael immediately shook his head. No. We looked at him. If Olivia just learned the truth, everyone inside that house is acting emotionally. He folded his arms. And emotional people destroy evidence. That sentence stopped me. He was right. Within 2 minutes, Michael had called the county judge requesting an emergency preservation order. Another attorney contacted the trust company. Rebecca phoned her former assistant. Everyone suddenly had a job. Everyone except me. For the first time in days, I simply sat there, watching professionals protect my future. It felt strange. I had always been the one solving everyone else's problems. Now, someone else was solving mine. 45 minutes later, Michael received a call. He answered without putting it on speaker. He listened, asked only 3 questions, then ended the call. They're gone. Who? Richard and Olivia? Where? No one knows. Susan remained at the house, completely devastated. Rebecca quietly whispered, She's probably learning everything herself. We arrived at my parents' home just before sunset. Police officers were already there, not because anyone had committed a crime, because neighbors had reported screaming. One officer recognized Michael immediately. After a short conversation, we were allowed inside. The house looked nothing like the one I had grown up in. A dining chair lay on its side. Picture frames had fallen from the wall. Broken glass covered the hardwood floor. My mother sat alone on the living room sofa. She looked 20 years older than I remembered that morning. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," those were the first words she had spoken to me in weeks that weren't excuses, not explanations, not justifications. Simply, "I'm sorry." I remained standing. For what? She looked around the room. For everything. There was no anger left in her voice, only exhaustion. "I should have stopped him." "When?" "The first time he chose Olivia over you." I said nothing. She continued. "I kept telling myself he was grieving. He wasn't grieving. He was punishing himself. And every time he tried to make Olivia's life easier." She covered her face. "Your life became harder for the first time." My mother admitted it. Not partially, not carefully, completely. "Did you know about the trust?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. "When?" "The day your grandmother changed it." I opened them again. "You knew for 15 years?" She nodded. "I begged Richard to tell you. He promised he would. Every year he promised." "What changed?" She answered almost immediately. "Fear." "What was he afraid of?" "That if you had control, you'd never help Olivia." The words landed with surprising softness. Because they were true, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Olivia had spent decades spending money she didn't have. Had I known about the trust, I would never have allowed nearly $5 million to disappear into her debts. My mother continued. "Richard convinced himself he'd only borrow from it." I looked at Michael. He raised an eyebrow. "Borrow?" "Yes." She nodded. "He believed he could replace everything before you found out." "Did he?" She slowly shook her head. "No." "How much is missing?" The room became silent. Finally she whispered, "Almost $1.3 million." Ethan inhaled sharply. Rebecca closed her eyes again. Even Michael looked stunned. 1.3 million. Not paperwork, not intentions, actual money, gone. I looked at my mother. "Where?" She began counting through tears. Olivia's first business, her second business, the lake house, the medical debts after her bankruptcy, the investment that collapsed, the luxury apartment, the legal settlements. Every failed decision Olivia had ever made had been quietly rescued by my inheritance. I suddenly remembered something. When I asked for help with graduate school, my mother couldn't even look at me. Richard said there wasn't enough money. He told me to take student loans. I know. I paid those loans for 9 years. I know. She was crying uncontrollably now. I should have told you every single day. I should have told you. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Everyone turned. Richard Hayes stood in the doorway. His suit was wrinkled, his hair completely out of place. For the first time in my life, my father looked like an old man. He saw me, then Ethan, then Michael, finally. He noticed the thick binders on the coffee table. He understood immediately. His shoulders dropped. "You know everything," I answered quietly. "No, I know enough." He slowly nodded. Then he said something I never expected. "I didn't come here to defend myself." He looked directly at me. "I came because there's one thing nobody has told you." He reached into his coat pocket, removed a single sealed envelope, and placed it gently on the coffee table. "This," his voice broke, "is the real reason I refused to walk you down the aisle." Nobody moved. The envelope sat on the coffee table between us. It looked ordinary, cream-colored. My name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Richard Hayes didn't try to hand it to me. He simply stepped back. "I wrote it 3 months ago." His voice was almost unrecognizable. "I never intended to give it to you this way." Michael Turner quietly spoke. "Miss Hayes." I looked at him. "Before you open it." He glanced toward my father. "I would like to ask Mr. Hayes one question." My father nodded. "Go ahead. Did you forge these documents?" Michael placed the fraudulent medical declaration on the table. Richard looked at it, closed his eyes, then answered, "Yes, no excuses, no hesitation, no denial." The room became perfectly still. And the power of attorney? Yes. The redirected trust notices? Yes. The venue changes? Richard looked at me. No, they were Olivia's idea. I wasn't surprised, but I allowed them. He lowered his head. "So that's my responsibility too." Michael slowly nodded. "Thank you." That simple admission changed everything. There would be no long legal battle over whether the documents were fake. The man who created them had confessed. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. More than 20 pages. The first sentence stopped me. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I've already failed you." I swallowed hard. The letter wasn't written like a legal confession. It was written like a father finally telling the truth. "You once asked me why I always looked guilty when I watched you graduate. I told you I was emotional. That wasn't true. I looked guilty because I had just transferred another $200,000 from your trust to save Olivia's business." I stopped reading. My hands trembled. Ethan gently squeezed my shoulder. I continued. "Every time Olivia failed, I heard Daniel's voice. Every time she cried, I remembered promising her father that I'd take care of his little girl. At first I borrowed small amounts, then larger ones. Each year I convinced myself I would replace everything before you noticed. Each year I failed. Tears blurred the words, not because of the money, because every sentence carried unbearable regret. Then something happened that terrified me. I received my diagnosis. The doctors couldn't promise how quickly my memory would disappear. I became convinced I had only months before I forgot account numbers, passwords, legal procedures, everything. I panicked. Instead of confessing, I committed the worst mistake of my life. I looked up. Dad. He didn't interrupt. He simply waited. I kept reading. I believed that if I could legally transfer the remaining trust to Olivia, no one would ever discover how much I had already taken. You would hate me, but at least Olivia would be safe. I told myself that sacrificing one daughter to save another was the least terrible choice left. I was wrong. Rebecca quietly wiped away tears. Even Michael stared at the floor. The letter continued. When you were 8 years old, you fell asleep on my shoulder after your piano recital. You whispered something I'll never forget. You said, Daddy, when I grow up, I want people to trust me the way I trust you, Margaret. I destroyed that little girl's dream. I couldn't continue for several moments. The room was silent except for my breathing. Finally, I turned to the last page. There was one final paragraph. Tomorrow I was supposed to refuse to walk you down the aisle, not because Olivia asked, not because I loved you less, because I knew I no longer deserved that honor. A father who steals from his daughter should never be the man who gives her away. I thought humiliating you would make it easier for you to hate me. I hoped hatred would hurt less than betrayal. I underestimated both. At the bottom, there wasn't a signature, only one sentence. If there is any justice left in my life, let Ethan be the man who reminds you that not every promise made by a man is eventually broken. I slowly folded the letter. No one spoke. Finally, I looked at my father. Why didn't you tell me 3 months ago? His answer came immediately. Because I was still trying to save myself. And now? He smiled sadly. Now I'm trying to save what's left of you. Michael broke the silence. Richard? My father looked at him. You understand what happens next. I do. There will be criminal charges, I know. Civil liability, I know. You'll probably lose your law license permanently. A faint smile crossed my father's face. I should have lost it years ago. Then something unexpected happened. Richard reached into his pocket once more. This time he removed a small brass key. He placed it beside the envelope. Rebecca gasped. She recognized it immediately. So, she whispered, you kept it. My father looked at me. Your grandmother gave me this the week before she died. What is it? A safe deposit box. I've never heard about it. Nobody has. He slowly pushed the key toward me. I never opened it. You expect me to believe that? Yes. Why? Because your grandmother made me promise. He took a deep breath. She said, Richard, if Margaret ever needs proof that she was always loved, Tell her to open box 417. He looked into my eyes, I think. His voice cracked. Today is finally that day. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the lawsuit. Not because of the trust. Not even because my father had confessed to crimes that would almost certainly send him to prison. I couldn't stop thinking about one thing, my grandmother. For years I had believed she left behind money. Instead, she had left behind a mystery. The following morning, Ethan and I met Michael outside First National Bank. The old building stood in the center of downtown. Its marble floors echoed with every step. The branch manager greeted Michael by name. I've already prepared the paperwork. She looked at me kindly. Miss Hayes, I'm very sorry for your family's situation. I managed a small smile. Thank you. 10 minutes later, we were escorted into the vault. Hundreds of safe deposit boxes covered the walls. The manager stopped in front of one. 417. She inserted her master key. I inserted mine. The lock clicked. She quietly excused herself, leaving us alone. My hands trembled as I pulled out the metal box. It was surprisingly light. Inside, there wasn't any jewelry, no cash, no gold. Only 3 things: a sealed envelope, a leather-bound journal, and an old VHS cassette labeled, "For Margaret." I stared at it. My grandmother kept a video? Michael smiled softly, apparently. The envelope had another familiar message. Open this first. I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting instantly transported me back to childhood. Every birthday card, every Christmas gift, every tiny note hidden inside my lunchbox. My darling Margaret, if you are reading this, then life has become far more difficult than I hoped. First, remember one thing. Nothing you discover today changes how deeply you were loved. Tears filled my eyes before I reached the second paragraph. Richard isn't an evil man. He's a frightened one. Fear makes good people do unforgivable things. If he ever betrays you, please remember that he betrayed himself long before he betrayed you. I looked up. Even Michael quietly wiped his glasses. My grandmother had written this 15 years earlier. She had somehow understood exactly what guilt would eventually do to my father. The letter continued. I left you financial security because I knew your heart. You would never measure your worth by money, but other people might. Never let anyone convince you that your kindness obligates you to finance their poor choices. Love and rescue are not the same thing. Those words hit harder than every legal document I had read. Love and rescue are not the same thing. My father had confused those ideas for 3 decades. At the end of the letter, my grandmother had written one final instruction. Now watch the tape. Fortunately, the bank maintained a small viewing room for old family recordings. The VHS player looked ancient. The picture flickered, then stabilized. My grandmother appeared on the screen. She looked exactly as I remembered. White hair, blue sweater, warm smile. She looked directly into the camera. Hello, sweetheart. I completely broke. For 15 years, I hadn't heard her voice. You've probably grown into the remarkable woman I always knew you'd become. She laughed softly. If Richard is sitting beside you, she looked off camera. Then stop interrupting, young man. Even Michael smiled. She knew him too well. Then her expression became serious. There are some things every granddaughter deserves to hear. You were never second. You were never less important. You were never difficult to love. I covered my mouth, because those were exactly the lies I had spent years believing. She continued. Families sometimes confuse sacrifice with fairness. They are rarely the same. If someone asks you to sacrifice everything, they're no longer asking for love. They're asking for permission. The room was completely silent. Then came the sentence that changed my life forever. Margaret, if one day your father disappoints you, forgive him if you can, but never surrender your future to protect his past. The recording ended with something unexpected. She reached toward the camera, almost as if she could still touch me. Now go build the family you deserved all along. The screen faded to black. None of us spoke for nearly 5 minutes. Finally, Michael quietly said, I've practiced law for 38 years. I've never seen anyone leave better legal advice, without mentioning the law once. That afternoon we met with the district attorney. Richard had already surrendered voluntarily. He confessed before investigators even finished reading the allegations. Forgery, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of trust assets. He admitted everything. He didn't negotiate. He didn't minimize. He simply accepted responsibility. Olivia, however, had disappeared. No one knew where she had gone. Her phone was disconnected. Her apartment was empty. The police believed she wasn't running from the investigation. She was running from the truth. For 34 years, she had believed one story about her life. In one afternoon, everything collapsed. I felt sorry for her, but for the first time, I refused to make her pain my responsibility. Saturday morning arrived, the day of my wedding. Not everything was as originally planned. The Grand Ashford Ballroom remained under investigation. Several contracts had been frozen. Many guests had heard rumors. Some expected the ceremony to be cancelled. Instead, Ethan smiled at me while fastening his tie. "So," he asked gently, "are we still getting married today?" I smiled through tears. "I've waited 34 years to start my real family. I'm not postponing it another minute." Just then there was a knock at the bridal suite door. A member of the venue staff stepped inside. "Miss Hayes?" She smiled warmly. "There's someone here asking whether you'll allow him to walk you down the aisle." I felt my heart stop. For one impossible second, I wondered if my father had somehow been released. The woman added quietly, "It's not Mr. Hayes. It's someone who says he made your grandmother a promise 25 years ago." She handed me a small folded note. It contained only 6 handwritten words. "Your grandmother asked me personally." My fingers tightened around the note. "Your grandmother asked me personally." I turned it over. Nothing else. No name. No explanation. Just those 6 words. I looked at Ethan. "I don't know who this is." He smiled gently. "Then let's find out." Outside the bridal suite stood an elderly man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He looked to be in his late 70s. Straight posture, silver hair, kind eyes. He held a worn leather hat in both hands. When he saw me, he smiled. "You have your grandmother's eyes." I searched my memory. Nothing. "I'm sorry." "We've never met." "No." His voice was calm. "But your grandmother made sure I knew all about you." He reached into his jacket and removed an old photograph. A little girl sitting on a porch beside an elderly woman. Me, Grandma Eleanor, and standing behind us, this man. I stared at the picture. "I don't remember this." "You were 5. He laughed softly. "You were more interested in feeding my dog than talking to me." I smiled despite everything. "My name is Thomas Whitmore." The name struck something deep in my memory. Grandma used to mention Mr. Whitmore whenever she talked about the community library. "He was your grandfather's closest friend," Rebecca whispered behind me. Thomas nodded. "We served together. I promised your grandfather that if anything ever happened to him, I'd always keep an eye on Eleanor." He paused. A few months before she passed away, she asked one more favor. His eyes became watery. She said, "Thomas, one day Richard may forget what it means to be a father. If that day ever comes, would you walk Margaret down the aisle for him?" Silence. Nobody moved. Thomas slowly extended his arm. "I've been carrying that promise for 15 years. If you'd rather walk alone, I'll understand." I looked at Ethan. He nodded once. Then I took Thomas's arm. I'd be honored. The chapel was already full. More than 200 guests had taken their seats. Whispers filled every corner. Everyone had heard some version of the rumors. Some expected a dramatic confrontation. Others believed the wedding had been canceled. The music began. The doors opened. Every conversation stopped. I stepped forward, not with my father, not alone, with a man who had kept a promise for 15 years. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed people quietly wiping away tears. Even those who knew nothing about the truth somehow understood. This moment mattered. Thomas leaned toward me. "Your grandfather would be proud." "So would Eleanor." I smiled. "I hope so." "No." He squeezed my hand. "I know so." When we reached Ethan, Thomas didn't simply shake his hand. He embraced him. Very quietly, so only Ethan could hear, he said, "Take care of our girl." Ethan answered without hesitation. "I will." Thomas stepped back. My wedding finally began. The ceremony itself lasted barely 20 minutes. No interruptions, no arguments, no dramatic speeches. Just two people making promises. Real promises. Not the kind written into legal contracts. The kind you choose to honor every single day. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause seemed endless. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. The reception was different from the one I had planned months earlier. Smaller, simpler, warmer. Many vendors had donated their services after learning what had happened. The florist quietly replaced every arrangement with white peonies. "My gift," she whispered. The photographer smiled. I deleted every unauthorized instruction weeks ago. Even the venue manager refused to charge us for the last-minute changes. Some weddings deserve a second beginning. Hamwar. Late that evening, while guests were dancing, Michael approached me. "I have some news. Good or bad?" The court granted an emergency accounting. He smiled. "We've already located nearly $800,000. I stared at him. "Recovered?" "Frozen before they could disappear." "And the rest?" "We'll keep looking." I nodded. For the first time, the amount mattered less than the principle. Justice had finally begun. 3 months later, Richard Hayes stood before a judge. He pleaded guilty. He accepted full responsibility. He surrendered his law license voluntarily. The court considered his confession, his cooperation, his medical diagnosis, and his agreement to repay every dollar possible. He received a prison sentence that was partially suspended because of his health, followed by strict supervision, restitution, and a lifetime prohibition from serving as a trustee or practicing law again. Some people thought the sentence was too lenient. Others thought it was too harsh. I stopped trying to decide. Justice belongs to the courts. Healing belongs to us. Olivia contacted me exactly once. The email contained only 2 paragraphs. "I don't know who I am anymore. I spent my whole life believing Dad was trying to prove he loved me. I never realized he was destroying you to do it." She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask to meet. Only one sentence remained. "I'm sorry for every time I accepted something that should have been yours." I replied with 6 words. "I hope you find your peace. Nothing more." Sometimes compassion doesn't require reconciliation. Susan and I started having lunch together once a month, not to erase the past, to build something new, very slowly. She stopped apologizing and started listening. That made all the difference. 2 years later, Ethan and I stood in the garden behind our home. Our daughter was taking her first uncertain steps across the grass. Thomas Whitmore sat nearby, laughing as she chased butterflies. He had become family in every way that mattered. Inside the house, hanging above the fireplace, was the last photograph my grandmother ever took with me. Beside it, our wedding picture, not with the man who gave me life, but with the man who kept a promise. And the man who kept every promise after that. The trust had been restored as much as the law allowed. Part of it became the Eleanor Hayes Family Integrity Scholarship, helping students whose education had been interrupted by family hardship. It felt like something Grandma would have smiled about. Sometimes people ask whether I ever forgave my father. The honest answer is complicated. I forgave him because carrying hatred would have chained me to his mistakes forever. But forgiveness didn't erase accountability. Love didn't erase consequences. Both were necessary. Both were true. My grandmother was right. Love and rescue are not the same thing. And I eventually learned something else. The people who share your blood give you your history. The people who keep their promises give you your future. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. Now I'd like to ask you something. If you were in my place, could you ever forgive a parent after a betrayal like this? Or would some wounds simply be too deep? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'd truly love to know what you think.